Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming along to our session number 9 in the ACCS Knowledge Share event series. We're very fortunate today that we've got Dr. Simon Brown with us, and he is the Customer Solutions Expert at the Molecular Horizons cryo-EM facility at the University of Wollongong. And today he's going to just give us a quick overview of the sorts of things that you might be able to do with cryoSPARC if you're interested in learning about it and how it might be able to help you with your research. Simon, if you'd like to get going and share your screen.
Sure thing.
Anytime you're ready.
Yeah, so I'll just talk for a couple of minutes just about cryoSPARC and kind of why we've chosen it for our solutions here. Today, really, I'm going to be talking about cryoSPARC Live, not cryoSPARC, the entire package. There's plenty of webinars and resources online about cryoSPARC and now about cryoSPARC Live as well. But I thought what I could do is sort of specifically run through why we chose cryoSPARC Live. And also, I'm going to run through a bit of what I'm going to call a speed run, which is showing you pretty quickly how we can go from a small data set to a complete structure. And I kind of like this data set because it's small and it gives us a relatively high resolution structure very quickly. So I guess to go back to why do we actually use cryoSPARC? It was probably 3 or 4 years ago, we were kind of looking at our workflows and we really wanted a solution such that we could get more information about our data as they came off the microscope. Because fundamentally, we have customers coming and they are spending big money and have invested a lot of time into their preparing their samples. And when they're actually looking at the data coming directly off the microscope, it's very, very hard to tell whether it's actually quality data or not. There's is the sample, like the sample freezing, the ice, things like that, are they of quality? And also, is the actual sample, the protein, which is frozen in that ice, is that homogeneous? Is it a high quality sample? So we kind of went into this with low expectations. So we kind of just started thinking about, oh, it'd be great if we could just do some motion correction on our micrographs. So for people who don't do cryo-EM, basically, when we're collecting data, we collect a movie stack, and then we need to align all the frames of the movie stack. That's because things shift during the collection. So if we can actually go ahead and do a motion correction on the image, then we can see more clearly what the image shows us. Also, we can go and do a CTF estimation on that image, off the motion corrected image, and that'll give us a rough idea of data quality. These are basically outputs that we could get that would give us kind of a bit of feedback about data quality. So we tried a number of different solutions to do this. We tried a package called Citation, which basically has some of these. It's a wrapper for some other tools. We tried using Reliance scripts to do this. And then we kind of stumbled upon the fact that cryoSPARC was talking about a private beta release of a live package. And so I went ahead and contacted cryoSPARC, and we were one of their beta testers when they first started doing their live packages. And as soon as we got cryoSPARC Live running, we realized that this blew completely out of the water any of the other things we've been using. Because not only could we go and find out that our data was of high quality, we could actually then, once we had the high quality data, we could go and we could generate 2D classes, and we could actually move all the way through to a 3-dimensional structure as the data was coming off the microscope. And besides being more powerful, the other thing which it really allowed us to do was it's quite simple to use. So for myself, because our big goal in our facility is to train our users to be fully independent, both in microscopy and the data analysis. So to have a package which I can sit down and teach a customer to use it rapidly like that was a real boon for us as a facility. So I think what I'll do is I'll just now open up basically a session from the beginning. This is, as I said, this was a small data set. This was collected. We moved into a new building. Must have been, it was right around when COVID was first starting, so about March last year. So we did some benchmarking as we do, sort of as we put microscopes into their new homes. And this was one of the first data sets I collected, actually in our Arctica when we moved into its new home. So what I'm going to do is I'm at home right now. I've logged in. Sort of, we've got a cryoSPARC running. We've got a few different cryoSPARC instances running at Wollongong. So these are running locally as opposed to our running it with our massive partners, mainly because then we don't have to move the data and we can get faster feedback on our microscope quality. So what I have currently is I have a data set which is sitting on our Panasys file server, which is sitting at the University of Wollongong. Normally the workflow would be movies would be arriving out of the microscope, automatically getting transferred to our file server. And as soon as they arrive at our file server, then they would be accessed by cryoSPARC Live. So that's one of the real fundamental things about cryoSPARC Live is as soon as the movie arrives in the location which you specify, cryoSPARC will be constantly looking in that spot for new movies arriving. We're processing as soon as they get there. So today's slightly different because I've actually got customers on the microscope, then I can't be doing demos on their data. So what I'm going to use is a data set which is sitting on our file server and was collected about 18 months ago or so. So what I'll do is I'll go and I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Oh gosh, my Mac is asking me to do some stuff here. Give me a moment. Okay. Okay, is that sharing for you guys? Hello?
Yes, we can see it.
You can see it? Okay, great. Okay, so what we're going to do here is I've opened up two tabs. So basically, I've got one tab, which is cryoSPARC Live, and then I've got one tab, which is our general cryoSPARC instance. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go make ourselves a new project. I'm going to go in here into projects, and I'm going to add a new project. And I'm just going to call this demo. I'm going to create a project. And I'm going to put it in a directory. This is our standard directory of where we keep cryoSPARC on this instrument. As you guys will set your things up your own way, this will all be up to you guys. So I'll select my location, create this project, and now I have this new project called demo. So now I'm going to go back to my cryoSPARC Live instance, and I'm going to create a new session. I'm going to put it in that project I just created, demo, and I'll just call it again, demo, easy. Okay, so this has brought up basically the cryoSPARC Live setup window here. So what we have here, this is actually the old version of cryoSPARC. The reason for that is I'm going to run this on our production machine. Our production machine is a 6 GPU machine, which is the one which we actually use live on the instrument. I also have another machine, which is more of my development machine. That's just got a couple GPUs in it. Ideally for cryoSPARC Live, you want to have 3 GPUs. They don't need to be super workhorse GPUs, but they just need to be reasonably CUDA capable GPUs. For example, on this machine, this is actually quite an interesting machine that we built specifically for cryoSPARC Live. It's all SSD, so I've got about 16 terabytes of SSD, and I've also got a rather large NVMe cache set up on this box, as well as 6 GPUs. So basically, all the processing happens on this box, while the movies are stored on a separate file server. So what I'm going to go do is just set up all the different parameters for cryoSPARC now, and I'll run through it and you guys can kind of watch. So first of all, I'm going to tell cryoSPARC where to go. So I'm going to point it towards a direction. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to go into our raw data directory. And I've kept some benchmark files there. Got some benchmark for Arctica. This is going to be an outerlace structure. So this was just outerlace, which I purchased from Sigma and then made grids of. And I'm going to select the path. These are MRC movies. It lets you search recursively, so you can dig down into different directories. And then I'm going to go and set up some of the computational stuff. I don't need a gain reference because this is off our Falcon camera. This is a K2 or K3. You need a gain reference. And I will enable this when everything else is set up. So I'm just going to do some little setups here. I've got 6 GPUs on this machine. I'm going to use 3 of them for pre-processing. That means I've got 3 more left, basically 1 more for reconstruction. Sorry, I've got one for 2Ds, 1 for 3Ds, and 1 as a spare. So if you had a machine, say you just had 3 GPUs, you would actually just go and set up pre-processing, so you choose 1, then you've got 1 left over for 2D, 1 left over for 3D. Okay, so just going to do some parameters. I've got my pixel size here, my accelerating voltage, aberration, dose, and then you just enter in a few things here, just about your particle size and what kind of box size you want to extract. Please ask questions as I go. Like, I'm just going to kind of smash through this so you guys can see how fast it is, but please do pause and say, hey, what about this bit or what about that bit? We can go and click advanced parameters here to actually do a whole bunch more in these different details. Most of that you can actually do as you're doing the run as well. So I'm not going to do that now. So I'm going to apply all these different settings, and I'm going to enable my continuous import, and then I'm going to hit stop. So you can see it just spooled up 3 GPUs, so 3 things going on in parallel to allow me to do my motion correction CTF estimation and picking. So you can see here it says 86 queued, now it says 83. So now it's actually started processing my data already. So it's doing motion correction on all 3 of these micrographs at the same time right now. And in a moment or two, we'll see the first one pop through. There we go. Okay. So you can see what we've got here is it's actually gone. It's done motion correction, it's done CTF estimation, and it's done picking, and it's done extraction. So on those micrographs, that's all done already. So if I click on this micrograph, you can see it here on the left. So this is Alblice. You can see the individual particles. Maybe I'll give you a tiny bit of low pass for someone who's not used to looking at cryo images. But you can see this is a very well-packed micrograph with some little patches in here. But this is actually because I lucked out and this grid happened to have extremely thin ice. So what we can see here is it's chugging along, going through these micrographs. What I will now do is I'll go take a look at some of the statistics about these micrographs coming off. So I'm going to go and take a look at individual. So what it's done is it's showing me here the flatness, because it uses a patched base CTF estimation. So it generates a defocus across patches. This is a global motion during the motion correction. This is local motion. This is my fit of my CTF estimation, and this is another fit of my CTF estimation. For any of you who look at micrographs a lot, will probably go, oh, wow, that looks pretty good. When we run on Arctica, we're getting CTF fits under 3 angstroms. All these look quite tight in terms of the local motion. And we've got, I mean, this is a Falcon camera, so we've got quite a bit of movement over the long exposure. So that's to be expected for a Falcon 3. You can see, if we can click on anything and make it zoom in, you can see some little tiny patches of maybe funny ice, but in general, the fit's quite good here. And I can then go and I can click on different micrographs and see what these fits look like. So that would sort of be your first readout when you're using cryoSPARC Live, is taking a look at what the data quality is. So once we've done that, normally if you're kind of running cryoSPARC, you would watch your first 10 or 20 images come off the microscope, and then you might actually go and go, oh, okay, all right, like this one's good, this one's bad, maybe I should move to a different spot on the grid, those kind of feedbacks. And that's really actually a fundamental point, which I didn't say in my intro, is we really use cryoSPARC Live to make decisions. That's the fundamental reason we want cryoSPARC Live. It's not to come out with a structure at the end, which is a nice second point, is customers who come and use the microscopes, they might actually walk out at the end of the day or the next morning with some biological answers. But our primary reason to have cryoSPARC is so people can make decisions rapidly as they're doing data collection. So this would be your first decision point. Are my grids good or not? Okay, so once we're kind of at this point, we got some reasonably high quality data. I'll go across to the next tab here. This is an overview of the data coming off currently. So it's kind of like looking at all the things we can see in individual, but giving us a graph over time of what our quality is like. So we've got things like motion, defocus, got things like CTF fit, which is a pretty critical parameter. We can go and we can zoom in here and look at different parameters in more detail. And we can actually go and set up filters as well. So we can filter particular levels in all these different things. We've got anything from how many blob picks did you do, how many particles are extracted, ice thickness. There's a lot of different features here. And we actually find these quite useful in low quality data sets, as we can filter at this point before moving on. All right, so let's go and see what's going on next. So I'm going to go to picking. We're going to take a look at what it's done so far. So you can see here, it's used those parameters I used at the beginning, 80 and 130, to do a blob pick. I kind of turn it on and off. Looks like it's doing a reasonably good job. It's missing quite a few particles. Part of that's because it's using this minimum separation distance of 1 diameter. It's probably a bit high. I'm missing some. I'll click on a few micrographs and see. It's doing a reasonable job, probably good enough for blob picking. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this blob pick to generate a 2D template. So what I'll do is I'll actually change a parameter first, just so you guys can see what happens when you change a parameter. I'll change this minimum separation, 0.1, and go activate for all. Now you can see what's happened is up here, it's different. It now says picking up here. So it's going to pause the motion correction. As soon as these motion corrections are done, now it's going to run across and it's going to re-pick and extract based on that new parameter. So it's running through. Now it's extracting, it's going across and going back to the beginning, re-picking, re-extracting based on that new parameter. So if then I go back to another micrograph, you'll be able to see that we're picking a little bit more now. Looks like it's actually missing on some of these micrographs. So what I'm going to do, sometimes it's a little funny about updating, so I just click on a different tab and come back. Okay, that looks a little better. Yeah, you can see it's missing some micrographs, some particles here, but we'll just go with that and just sort of say, okay, we've got a rough blob pick. So I'm going to go over here to template, and I'm going to use these blob picks actually to create some templates. So I want to create or load templates. I'm going to create them. I'm just going to use the defaults here of 20 classes, and I'm going to make these from manual picks. So we'll do this, in this case, from 50 micrographs, if you've got 50. And I will just start a 2D classification. So now we're going to be currently running 4 GPUs. We've got 3 GPUs doing all the pre-processing. We've got 1 GPU doing my template creation here. Okay, so this is going to take a couple minutes to make a template. You can see that we're still running through the motion correction here. So you can imagine that if I was now sitting at the microscope, and let's say I had started a run with 100 micrographs or so, and maybe I'm getting 100 micrographs an hour or something, then I would steadily have these micrographs appearing as they come off the microscope. As they come off, it would then go and use these same parameters for motion correction, CTF estimation, and picking to feed into those new micrographs. And the amazing part about cryoSPARC Live is it continues to do this on the fly. So if I'm in an instance where I've got a 2D classification running and a 3D refinement running, cryoSPARC will continuously motion correct, pick the particles, and add these new particles into the 2D classification and the 3D refinement as we go. So we've had examples where we've been running the instrument, we'll set up cryoSPARC at 4 p.m., everything looks reasonable. Set up an ab initio, start the refinement, and then come in the next morning, and we've got a structure sitting at 3.1 angstrom. Which for us, like to be able to do that with no user intervention overnight is a really nice feature to be able to support our customers. Okay, so you can see we're chipping away here at our template creation. We've done 9 iterations so far. And you can see we're not just blobs anymore. We're beginning to get some little structural features here. So that's a good sign. This is going to do 20 iterations. And if we've got some features coming out halfway, that's a good sign. So hopefully this will give us some templates that are good enough to continue on. I'll take a little break for questions. If anybody has any questions at this moment, just let us finish off this template creation. Anybody got anything out there? I'm not very good at this whole like talking to my screen while people are listening, but let's see. I've got one thing on my little chat box here. Oh yes, that is not for the question. All right. Okay, so you can see as we're going here, that these templates are now beginning to actually get a few features on here. So autolace kind of looks like an X. So it's, well, we'll see what it looks like in a few minutes actually. But what we're looking at here is there's 1, 2, 3 sort of sticky out bits of the X, and the fourth one is hidden behind. Often autolace too, it's a tetramer, and it ends up in the ice such that one of the arms of the X shoves up into the ice and denatures. So we actually end up, although it's a tetramer and we refine it using a D2 symmetry, the actual particles themselves, often one of the subunits is a little bit misfeatured. Okay, so we've done that.
Can I ask a question, please?
Yeah, please.
Simon, so what is the difference between cryoSPARC and cryoSPARC Live? Why would you use one over the other?
So Live is really a wrapper on top of cryoSPARC. So it's actually using all the exact same tools and algorithms that cryoSPARC uses, but it's a wrapper such that you basically get this GUI here, which makes it very easy to navigate as you're working through a data set on the fly. And the other thing which cryoSPARC Live does is it gives you the on-the-fly pre-processing, which isn't part of the normal cryoSPARC. And it automatically links things like the motion correction to the picking, to the 2Ds, to the refinement. It links all those together in a format. So it's basically like cryoSPARC can do all the same things, but you would have to set up each job manually. So what we've done so far in here, we've probably done at least 5 or 6 different jobs. And you would have had to start a job, wait for it to finish, start the next job, wait for it to finish, iteratively, while cryoSPARC Live is this kind of GUI wrapper on top of that, which makes it all happen.
Wow. Okay, so once you've done it in Live here, are you then able to export it and take it to cryoSPARC itself later on if you wanted to do?
So it's already there.
Okay.
So if we go back to here, so to that demo I created, you can see here, this is actually the normal cryoSPARC instance. I've got my live workers sitting here. I've got an import particles that was importing some of those particles from the Blob pick. And here's the 2D classification, which I was just running. And you can see actually now it's completed. This is the first 2D classification. So it's run this as a normal 2D classification in cryoSPARC. So it's really the live is sitting on top of cryoSPARC. So everything is still here in cryoSPARC. And so once we get deeper into it, what we end up doing is we can actually just use this same cryoSPARC setup to then go and do further processing.
And so if you wanted to then take that and do the 3D thing, you can do that later on offline or? Yeah,
I mean, we'll do it online today, but yeah, we would continue processing using this data, which has already been processed in Live. Most of our customers like to go and reprocess somewhere else. But I do have workflows, which actually I'm doing today, is we ran some data on Monday night on the microscope, and we did cryoSPARC Live, and it gave us quite good information. And so I'm going to actually go and send that whole project across down to Massive, so then they can import that into Massive and continue their processing at Massive in that way.
So can I ask you a question about then how you're going to transfer that? Does it go within cryoSPARC from the website, or will you use something like Globus to transport the files, or how will you achieve that?
So I'll just SFTP down there, so I'll use FileZilla or a tool like that. cryoSPARC projects are all self-contained. So we have a workspace here, and that workspace sits inside a project. So I can go and I can just send this whole project 68. Or project 68, I can just send that directory down to Massive, and then that can be imported in, and people can access it that way. And all the sort of bits and bobs that are needed are included in that project, except for the movies from the file server. So they're separate. So that's the junction between the two. Okay, so if I go back to Live here, you can see I've got really kind of 3 classes, which makes sense. That's pretty normal off a Blob pick, because the Blob pick is pretty rough. So I'm going to go and I'm going to pick these 3. I'm going to give it a particle diameter. this particle diameter is actually used as a mask. And I am going to activate. You can see the default here, minimum separation distance is quite a bit lower for template picking. That's pretty normal because with template picks, you've got a more rigorous pick basically. So let's see how it's doing. You can see it's already running through them. So I'll go back here. So there's our blob picks. It doesn't update for some reason. There we go. So I'll leave both of them up there in this micrograph. Can you guys see how basically it's picking approximately the same locations, but with slight shifts to them? And what I can also do is I can turn down my threshold here. So another nice thing about cryoSPARC is all these kind of things kind of update as you do them. So I'll turn off the blobs now and just do the templates. But as I move this threshold, you can see them appearing and vanishing. So it's really easy to go and play with things like thresholds, as opposed to like programs like Reliant, which are quite clunky to do this kind of stuff. It's all very intuitive in cryoSPARC. I'm just going to run to a few micrographs which are slightly different, just for fun. So this micrograph is a fun one. So what's happened here is the ice is so thin that it's actually squeezed out the particles from the center of the pore. So we're slightly off center. And so you can see a little edge of particles, and this is empty ice here. You can see, however, the blob picker has been a little bit enthusiastic. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go bring this power score here up a little bit. So basically, these are the low contrast picks. I'm going to bring this up a bit just to get rid of most of those. I prefer to slightly overpick, so I'll probably leave it about there. There's a few, you can see this one's almost perfectly centered. You can see this particle is here, here, and here, and none in the middle. And then that one's totally empty. So I just like to kind of look through a few micrographs, make sure that my picking, looking at different defoci. So for example, that's 0.86 versus 1.8. You can see we've got a lot more contrast in the 1.8. Again, you can see the ice is really nice and thin. I've got these little patches with no particles. Okay, so now, while I've been talking, we've actually finished doing a template pick for all of the micrographs. And I'm pretty happy with those thresholds now. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the thresholds for all. So now it's going to go and it's going to re-extract. It doesn't have to re-pick because it's already done the picking. It's just extracting the different threshold. So it's just extracting all of these. It moves pretty quick. We're going through. And once we've done that extraction, I'm going to go and start our 2D classification. What I can actually do is I don't have to wait till it's done. So cryoSPARC Lab is smart enough that it can bring in new particles as a classification is already running. So even though I'm just halfway done, I'm just going to go and start a classification. So what I did there was I just used all the defaults. But what that is there is also this button right here. So what you can do here is you can set custom parameters. What I'll do is I'll let this first 2D classification run through before I go and set custom parameters. So what that basically allows you to do is build a job and then go into your normal cryoSPARC instance over here, and it'll create a job that's in a building state and such that you can change all the different kind of advanced parameters, but still use that in cryoSPARC Live. Okay, so you can.
And what sort of parameters are they that you can play with?
Yeah, so I'll just show you the ones which I quite like to change.
Okay.
I'll just go and I'll just create a 2D job. Just it's not actually linked to this, but I can just show you the parameters. So here in 2D classification, the ones I find the most useful are, so this would be for lower quality data. So these are things, lower signal to noise, lots of junk, really small particles. Things you can do are turn off force max over poses shifts. This actually forces cryoSPARC to work a little bit more like Reliant. My understanding is it's a little bit less certain about classification. It's a lot slower. but it can give quite better results. Also, it's often helpful to increase the number of iterations here. So usually if I turn off force max, I'll double this number of online iterations. And this one is actually quite useful as well. So this is called the batch size per class. So this is kind of when the algorithm first starts, how many particles is it put into each batch, I believe. And so this is their little thing. They say for small or low signal to noise ratio particles, this can be increased to 200. I've actually just increased all the way up to 1,000 and seen quite big differences. Again, this will slow you down a bit, but for lower quality particles, it makes a big difference. So often if I'm struggling with something, the first thing I'll do is I'll go in, increase the batch size per class, increase online iterations. So 40, 1,000, and just give that a crack. If that doesn't work, then I'll go in and try this force max.
So how many iterations do you think is a sweet spot? Is it about 20 usually?
For good quality data, 20 is fine. Yeah.
Okay.
But you'll see here, I mean, we're on iteration 10 and we're already getting nice classes.
So there'd be, say for example, there'd be no purpose in doing 100 iterations or anything like that. That would just be overkill.
Exactly. Yeah. And you'll just, I mean, because 2D classification, really, we're just trying to clean out the junk. We're not trying to actually, well, that's why I look at it. Like there's different arguments on different ways of doing it, but most people, I believe, just use it as a way to get rid of the really bad stuff and then use 3D classification as a way to separate out the rest of the stuff which isn't your particles of interest. Okay, so this is still cruising along. I'm just trying to think if there's anything else I can tell you guys as this is running. Does anyone else have any questions about this stuff as we're going?
I did have one question, Simon. Is there a practical limit on how fast cryoSPARC will work with the number of available GPUs?
It's a practical limit. So
you showed up how it had 3,
yeah,
and it was working on 3 things, but if you had many more GPUs, is it a linear scaling of how much faster it'll work?
How fast can Panasas serve our movies to us, right?
Right, okay.
Yeah, so I mean, so my understanding is cryoSPARC actually isn't hugely GPU dependent, unlike Reliant. Instead, it's the throughput of the files which makes a really big difference. Hence why when we spec'd up this machine, we looked really carefully at, thanks to Jason, building a machine which was highly dependent on the SSDs. So we have that large SSD space, so all of our projects can sit on the SSD, but also we have an extremely fast cache. So you can see, for example, in our 2D classification job here, if I look at the beginning, you can see this was our cache loading step. And so our loading speed of our cache, this is quite fast. This is what we saw when we actually really set up this GPU box as we liked it. And because our cache is fast, that means that all these iterations of the 2D classification and 3D as well are fast. So we really designed this box around cryoSPARC Live.
So Simon, if I'm understanding you correctly, based on a summary of our conversation when we built this,
yep,
it's more important to try to design as fast as possible local storage to feed cryoSPARC than necessarily having more GPUs in that system once you've got a minimum number.
I think once you have, I would say 4, then that would be correct. Yes. So the GPUs themselves don't have to be ridiculously fast. Like it's not worth spending the money on the sort of top of the line 3090 whatever GPU is currently the hot stuff. And this is older GPUs, but because we have the fast storage, then it's quite quick. We also spec this out with 6 GPUs because we knew that 3 was a minimum for cryoSPARC Live, and we have 2 instruments. So we thought, well, if we have another GPU box for our Arctic instrument, but we thought that, well, if we ever lose one of our GPU boxes, it makes sense for our 6 GPU box to be big enough that we can actually serve both instruments. And so that's actually worked out quite well because we have been having trouble with our other GPU box. So we're kind of dependent on this single box right now. Okay, so you can see now actually our 2D classification is done. So what it's done is it went and it did 20 iterations. I can actually show you what it's done here. So 18 iterations, iteration 20. So it finished sort of the first 20 cycles. And then it went and it looked and it went, oh, okay. Now I've got 86 exposures. And now I'm going to go and I'm not going to remove any particles. I'm going to repeat the 32,000 that already existed. And I've got 12,000 new ones from the new exposures which were picked while the 2D had already been started. So then it went and it added those 12,000 particles and did a couple more iterations to get those particles into place. And now it's just sitting there waiting. So it's basically every 10 seconds or so, it's kind of going in and saying, oh, no new particles, just waiting for me to do something. And so if we're actually in a proper live mode right now, more micrographs will be coming in, they'll be getting picked and dropped into this 2D classification. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and I'm going to select the ones I like.
So how do you know which ones you like?
How do I know which ones I like? Practice. I don't like ones with little halos here. You can see that one has a bit of a halo. That means that there was a particle which was quite close to it, or particles close to it. This one's got a little bit of a halo too. Like it's a bit of a judgment call. I'm going to keep that one because it's got quite a few particles in it. This one looks a little bit worse to me. Often they won't be organized as nicely and you'll get junk up the top. This just happened to be a quite clean data set. You can see here, we don't see any real nice 2D features in that one. This is two particles stuck together, so we definitely don't want that one. So I'm going to keep this and I'll keep that, and I will not include that. Okay, so I'm saying these are the ones I like. So that's about 30,000 particles out of 45,000. And now I'm going to go and do an ab initio job. So this is going and creating basically the initial structure, which then we refine from. I'm going to limit my number of particles. I'm going to limit to 10,000 just for the sake of time today. And I know that this is a D2 symmetry, so I'm going to add a D2 symmetry. Normally people, unless you're sure about the symmetry of your molecule, it's not a good idea to have symmetry either in your ab initio or your refinement. It will it'll basically force things into your structure which aren't correct because it's trying to refine and create a symmetry of something which isn't symmetric. Okay, so we are off and going. So I'm not going to change anything at this point because it has a tendency to crash the ab initio jobs. But I will tell you what I would normally do at this point. So you can see here that we were picking based on these templates. So we had these 3 templates. However, now that I've got this 2D classification done, there's a bit more there, isn't there? There's some more angles and things which you haven't looked at. So we can actually go and refine this. So what I can do is I can take a look and go, okay, that's job 7. Go into my picking and go, project 68, job 7, load it in. And now all of a sudden that 2D classification is now in my picking area. So I can go and choose all the different templates that I like and use these as my template picks. So in a normal job where I'm working on this sort of unknown thing, I would do a few iterations of this. So I'd use blob picking to kind of bootstrap it and get it going. And then once I've got a few templates, and I can use those for template picking, and then iterate that process. And it's something also to be careful of in that blob picking process, because blob picking, of course, is not biased. While if I'm choosing particular templates, that's my user bias, only picking particular types of molecules. So unless you really know what you're looking for, the blob picking does have that strength at the beginning because it's unbiased. Okay, so I'm not actually going to click on any now because I don't want to do a repick because that might crash the ab initio job. This is about halfway done now. You can see it looks like a blob. Now, if anybody who's looked at ACCS before, it actually does have these 4 kind of lobes. So I know I'm heading in the right direction. And then we'll just let this finish. Just wondering whether I can set up, oh, well, what I'll do while this is running, I'll show you something else. So what we can do now is I'm going to go here to configuration. I'm going to export my particles. So what this does is it takes all of the particles which I have extracted, so ones that are based on the thresholding here. I'm going to go and I'm going to export these particles. So Catherine, this kind of goes back to your question earlier. How can you link up between cryoSPARC Live and cryoSPARC itself? So there are these 2 buttons. Oh, just to let you guys know, this is actually the older version of cryoSPARC. So this is, because I'm running on my production box, our development box, I've upgraded it to the latest, but I'm still kind of testing it and stuff. And I want to make sure that our production box is working. So I haven't upgraded this one yet. So this, the GUI, the latest version just has a slightly different GUI. All the actual features are almost the same. There's also, so we go back to this export. So I've exported the particles. We can also export the exposures. So that would export into the normal cryoSPARC instance. So if I go back here, a normal cryoSPARC instance, we have import particles. So now that I'm actually in the normal cryoSPARC, there's no reason why I can't just go and say set up a different 2D classification in the normal cryoSPARC instance. So I'll just go and grab these particles, bring them in. Let's do something different. Let's do 100 classes. And maybe we'll do, just for fun, we'll do 15 iterations. And maybe we'll increase the maximum resolution. I'm just sort of playing with some things that might make it look different. And I will queue that up. Because I have 4 GPUs, I have enough GPU resource to have these sort of side jobs running as well. This is actually really nice when we're running large data sets with multiple things on the grids, because I can kind of have cryoSPARC Live running and at the same time be running a number of side jobs. Okay, so we've got this 2D class should be getting ready to start. Our ab initio is still running. So I'll go back to the cryoSPARC Live over here. Okay, ab initio. So done iteration 600. So I find myself getting impatient when I'm doing these kind of things. So I'll often jump back to cryoSPARC and find out how long has it got left and things like that. So for example, with our ab initio, take a look here, iteration 600. I can scroll down. Estimated time remaining, 62 seconds. Great. Okay. So you can kind of keep an eye on jobs by coming across into the normal cryoSPARC instance. You can take a look at the 2D we just set up. Okay, so it's just done the first iteration. It's just taken away. You can see we've got 100 classes, not 50. Okay, so back to live. Okay, ab initio is completed. I'll change my thresholding here a little bit. Okay, that looks like ACCS to me. Kind of like the X-like structure with 4 lobes. So once I'm happy with an ab initio, then I'm going to go into refinement. Again, I'm going to go D2. And I'm going to start. Okay, the ab initio is off, or sorry, refinement is off and running. So you can see what it's done is it has only taken the particles selected here into the refinement. And if this was a proper streaming run, then particles, or sorry, micrographs would be motion corrected, CTF estimated, particles picked, fed into the streaming 2Ds, and then if they fall into one of these classes, then they would be fed into the streaming refinement. Okay, so this streaming refinement is off and going. This should take about 10 minutes or so. And let me just go back to here. Okay, so you can see this is moving along. The side job is moving along quite well. and we're on iteration 4. So that will continue to move. I'll just,
Simon,
yeah,
can I
please,
ask
go
a
ahead.
question?
Yep.
When the refinement's done, how do you know that you're happy with it? Like, do you get a confidence on it, or when do you say I've refined it enough?
Oh, refined it enough. So I mean, that's more the thing that is outside of cryoSPARC Live, really. So every researcher's got their own favorite tools on how they want to validate their structures and whether they've, because there's limitations on how much data you can collect, and then how much time you want to spend working on your structures, how many different subgroups you want to separate your protocols into, things like that. It gets kind of to that question of how long is a piece of string when it comes to refinement. My viewpoint on live is that this is really, again, to make a decision. So from the refinement, we can decide, is subunit beta 2 or whatever you're looking for, is it there? Something like that. I mean, for example, we were looking at proteins bound to Fabs, and this was just earlier this week. And so we wanted to find out, was the Fab there? So from a 2D, it might just look like a very sort of faint blur. But if we go into 3D, then we can see, is that Fab there or not? And that's really kind of that decision-making process for that person on the microscope of, should I stop now and put it in a different grid? Or should I continue processing on this one? Or continue collecting on this one? So once it gets into kind of the real in-depth processing of getting to that real high resolution and tweaking and masking and those sort of things, that's something which people would do outside of the live framework.
So you'd use the full version of cryoSPARC for that, would you?
Yeah, or a lot of people will prefer to use Reliant for that.
Okay.
My understanding is Reliant is better at 3D classification. And so unless you've got a completely homogeneous sample, then you'll find that Reliant is better at separating out different groups of molecules and things like that. Unfortunately, it's still rather challenging to move from cryoSPARC to Reliant.
Will the outputs from cryoSPARC be able to be taken into Reliant?
Yes and no. There's tools for cross compatibility, but people still have challenges in that space. And I think the two developers maybe don't sync up very well.
It's a future challenge. That's all right.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So we'll just go back to refinement. I'm pretty much done with what specifically I was going to tell you guys. So this refinement is going to sit here and go through its iterations. We'll just come back to it in a few minutes and we'll see where it's gotten to. But my feeling is it'll get pretty good. I'm just trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to show specifically. Not off the top of my head, no. Oh, there was one thing, which is just sort of a random detail. But if for masking, people kind of get stumped with the masking in cryoSPARC Live. I'm going to go back to my 2D classification job here. So it's added this circular mask here. And it's added a circular mask of 130. And when I first started using this program, I wasn't clear where this mask was coming from because I never entered that mask. And that's actually quite an important part of a 2D classification is what is the mask? So basically it's applying a mask during the classification. So it's cutting off stuff out of that 130 angstrom circle. And so it turns out the place that mask comes from is this particle diameter, which was put into the template picking. So that's what that number is there. It's not actually a particle diameter used for picking. It's actually the mask which is applied in 2D classification.
And can you control that?
So I can change that. If I change that at this point, I'd have to restart my 2D classification because it's going to have to redo the whole thing. And then that's going to kill my refinement job. But that was something which we could have set up at this initial step of our picking here, was that maximum particle diameter as well there.
And does cryoSPARC Live sort of just when you start it make a good guesstimate based on the blobs?
Yeah, so I was actually just looking at this yesterday. What mask does it use for the blob picking? So we can actually take a look because we have this 2D classification, which was based on blob picking. So there it's used this 143 number. I still don't know exactly where that comes from. It's something related to these two numbers here, but it's come up with a mask diameter based on the blob picking.
It's added GST, hasn't it? It's 143
Yeah.
GST.
Okay, so I think at this point, we'll just let this refinement go. And I'm happy just to start answering questions.
Does anyone have anything else they'd like to ask, Simon?
I hope I didn't go too fast through everything. I'm happy to go through anything else that might be helpful more slowly. We're currently at 39 minutes of our run. So we give another.
I have a question if I can jump in.
Yeah, please do.
Hi, Simon. It's Michael here from UQ. How you going?
Oh, good day, Michael. How are you?
I'm good. I just have it's not so much about cryoSPARC, obviously, because I'm pretty familiar with it in terms of operational.
Yeah.
But you described a number of times there, the people that are using the facility and using the software as customers.
Yep.
And so I'm curious as to what, how you run things in terms of, the restrictions around cryoSPARC and commercial use.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, so we've talked with the cryoSPARC guys about sort of the way that we run our facility. The reason we call them customers is, well, James and I are both American, and we're kind of big on customer service. And
sure.
So we've found that because we kind of think of these people as coming in, and if we think of them as customers, then we like that from a customer service perspective, as opposed to a user, which kind of has a lower standard in our minds. And I mean, this is more of a nomenclature that James and I use to keep that mentality. In terms of cryoSPARC and their licensing, we did clarify with them kind of how we ran the facility, and they weren't concerned at that point. This was during the kind of beta period of cryoSPARC Live. So I'm not sure how things will change, and especially people sort of coming in now trying to get new license for cryoSPARC Live, how that will work. Because we're actually quite involved during that period of the beta period. So we were going back and forth with cryoSPARC a lot in that development phase, kind of working out the bugs and adding new features and things like that. So we kind of work in that partner space.
So that means you're not paying for cryoSPARC, basically.
Oh, that's correct. Yeah. So because like, for example, the guys at Monash, they do have a commercial license for some of the work they do with explicitly with pharma companies and things like that. But I guess that's my understanding. Yeah. So if we had people who weren't academic as our customers, then things would be quite different.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Thanks.
Yep. No worries.
You could point out, Simon, that even though we aren't paying for cryoSPARC, you are paying for some support around it, though obviously not from cryoSPARC itself, if other people were interested in that aspect.
Yeah, well, I mean, how about you describe that, Jason? Because you know that relationship.
Sure. So I was just going to point out, Michael, that cryoSPARC is a relatively complex beast, and Simon is not someone who wants to spend his time playing with the software when he'd rather spend the time working with the customer. So we actually use single particle in the US to provide support around the cryoSPARC package. It's a pretty cost-effective deal. So we originally actually purchased hardware from them, and basically James and Simon had put me onto them as a group, and the hardware essentially came with a support package for the software on the machine. Single Particle have since clarified that they provide the support independently, irrespective of any hardware, whether you've purchased it from them or not. So for about $1,000 US a year per machine, they'll actually support the application. And both James and Simon have explained to me that that's a pretty good deal, given they look after the updates. If there's a problem, it needs reinstallation, there's someone they can pick up the phone to. So that might be something, if you do use cryoSPARC and you don't have the local resource to support the actual software in the package, then you might want to talk to single particle.
Yeah, thanks. My question was mainly around the legalities of it rather than the value of the support. Yeah, I mean, it is a good deal. It basically runs on a model very similar to like Linux distributions, right? You can either just have them for free or you can pay for the support, is my understanding. And that's not a path that we've gone down. But yeah, my question was, yeah, I'm relatively familiar with the way it operates in a commercial space. It was more to do with the legalities of it. That's all.
No,
but thanks for clarifying.
I can appreciate the legalities. I guess this is one of the things that you've pointed out, that if you're doing pure commercial work, that there's a straightforward process to actually, go out and get a commercial license. But at the end of the day, if you're not actually a commercial entity in and of itself, then cryoSPARC, because I've also had these conversations with them as part of the licensing, cryoSPARC are pretty relaxed about saying if you're a uni and you're doing collaborative type stuff, even with an organization like, let's say, ANSTO or CSR or something along those lines, they're fairly relaxed in terms of the licensing conditions. But yes, if you are working for a for-profit entity, contract research in that sense, then yes, you're down the path of having to do a commercial license. So because the university is a not-for-profit in this instance, it seems that they give you a fair bit of leeway at this point in time.
Yeah, Simon, Chung Han's asked a question there, which is that can someone bring their own license that they may hold and use it on your system?
I don't know. We've never sort of thought about that problem before.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how to manage it. So what would be the benefit of that? I'm not entirely clear.
That might be a question for cryoSPARC themselves. Maybe
yeah,
you can.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really go much into sort of the licensing and install space. I go more on the customer usage of the software.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I'm sure if there was a particular need. So that's actually why we have our development box, is so we can try things like this. So if, let's say, there was a customer that was coming in from a commercial space, we could probably apply their commercial license to our development box, and then they could use that development box for their commercial research.
I would imagine if they are a license holder and their version that they're using is the same as yours, would it matter? Because legally they've purchased a license. So
yeah, that's a good point too. Yeah,
I'm not sure. And I think we've got time for just one last little question there before we wrap up the session. Joby's asked, can you explain the different types of 3D refinements that you can create there?
Yeah, so I'm not an expert on it, but I can kind of briefly talk to it. So if we take a look here, basically cryoSPARC, they have what they call their legacy. I don't use that at all. We've got their homogeneous refinement. And so one tool which I find very useful in here is the refinement of the global CTF and the defocus, especially the global CTF. So this was something that was added to Reliant a while before cryoSPARC. What's really cool about the way it's implemented in cryoSPARC is it's actually implemented as part of the iterations in the refinement process. So you can optimize a per group CTF and choose whether you want to fit, tilt, or all these higher order aberrations. And it does this as the actual refinement's ongoing. And so what you can do is it'll refine it down to a certain resolution, and then it'll go and fit either these global CTFs, or it'll fit per particle defocus, and then do another round of iteration, and then do the fits again and do another round. And so what I've found that really helpful for is this is actually something I'll kind of do on the fly, say halfway through a run, is I'll set up a side job using this refinement technique. And this will actually give me the feedback, how well is my microscope set up in terms of tilt, things like that. So I can actually get myself back some information in terms of the quality of the microscope setup. And this is also things that are crucial for high resolution. So what we'll find with this data set, this one will come down to about 3 angstroms in the live, but then I'll actually have to go and fit tilt. And once I fit tilt, I can get this data set down to 2.5. In terms of the other versions of 3D refinement, so there is a version of sort of 3D classification, which is this heterogeneous refinement. People say it's not as good as cryoSPARC, or sorry, as good as Reliant. I'd probably agree with that, but I don't really have enough experience to speak to that. There's also a non-uniform refinement. People find that's very helpful for structures that have differences in basically the map quality in different areas of the structures. My understanding is this is quite useful for membrane proteins when they're sort of bound into a micelle or something like that. I would suggest going and taking a look at some of the cryoSPARC resources about this kind of stuff, because they've got really good online resources describing both what are the values of these different types of refinement and where they can be best applied.
Thanks, Simon. Thank you so much.
No problem.
I really enjoyed today's session and I learned a lot, and thank you so much.
No problem.
If anyone has any questions, would you mind if they dropped you an email? Would that be a
Oh,
problem?
no, I'll be happy to. Yeah, not a problem.
Okay, great. All right, so thanks everyone for coming along and listening, and thank you again, Simon. It was
Thanks,
really
guys.
great. Thank you.
Thanks, Simon. See you.